Harvesting season is over, and I'm wondering, do we appreciate the art of harvesting apples? Do we really understand it? Clearly, there are good apples and bad ones. How can you spot the bad apples when oftentimes they might look very similar to the good ones? It can be very challenging. And being prepared for winter is already such a difficult task. So, getting good at harvesting means learning from past mistakes and not repeating them next season. Which brings us to the most famous of all harvests, which took place in the Garden of Eden. According to Carl Jung, the attainment of consciousness was the most precious fruit of the tree of knowledge, the magical weapon which gave man victory over the earth, and which we hope will give him a still greater victory over himself. Did Eve harvest good fruit or bad fruit that day? According to Jung, it seems he's saying that it was a good thing. Well, God said not to eat from that tree in particular, but that any of the other trees in the garden could be eaten from. If the harvesting of that fruit was the magical weapon which gave man victory over the earth, why were Adam and Eve kicked from the Garden of Eden after eating it? God had already given them dominion over everything before they consumed it. Up until the Enlightenment, most Europeans looked at what happened in the Garden of Eden and thought that it was a very negative, sinful, unconscious act, having eaten the forbidden fruit, which is why it was known as the fall of man. Everyone knows the legendary story about how Newton was sitting under a tree and an apple fell on his head, which led him to the discovery of the theory of gravity. And now the apple has a more positive connotation, being associated with the Enlightenment, which is why the Apple logo has a bite in it, which connects it to the forbidden fruit. It has a positive connotation because it's linked with the pursuit of knowledge. It's true, our greatest gift, consciousness, which separates us from all the animals of the earth, is indeed a gift. It's what makes us human. But was it really the forbidden fruit that allowed for that awakening to happen? If that's true, why would God not want us to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." Then in Genesis 3, a serpent tempts Eve. But the snake said to the woman, "You will not die. God knows that if you eat the fruit from that tree, you will learn about good and evil, and you will be like God." I think most people's interpretation of this story would be that God is the good guy and that the serpent is the bad guy. But here's the thing. Believing that the fruit is what gave us consciousness would actually invert that interpretation. If you think about it, the way that it's written, it makes it seem like God is the one that's trying to keep us blind and unconscious. Why would someone not want to eat from a tree that's called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? The way things are worded, it's subtly trying to imply that the serpent is the good guy, which is really bizarre. In Western Europe, the forbidden fruit was often depicted as an apple. Going further back, in ancient Nordic myth, apples were a symbol of love, fertility, and youthfulness. Obviously, the meaning has changed over time. Looking at the etymology of the word apple, you can see how it's evolved into something bad, that it has to do with deception and lying. Furthermore, the apple developed an association with lewdness and intoxication, which is why in fairy tales an apple can be used to poison someone, like in the German folklore tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The evil witch famously gives Snow White a poisoned apple, which puts her to sleep. Even in Greek myth, there seems to be a magical trickster element regarding apples. In the race to win Atalanta's hand in marriage, Hippomenes knew he could not beat her in a fair race, so he used 3 golden apples, which were gifts of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, to distract Atalanta. It took all 3 apples and all of his speed, but Hippomenes was finally successful, winning the race and Atalanta's hand with the use of magical apples. He defeated her by cunning, not speed. Going back to the story of the Garden of Eden, how exactly did the serpent manage to get Eve to give up everything, the Garden of Eden, to eat a piece of fruit? Well, we all know that she was tempted, right? But what exactly does that mean?
The point, man.
It's true in relationships too, and I think that as we atomize ourselves in our relationships, I think the relationships break down. And there's a beautiful thing in the beginning of Genesis. So the phrase that's used when it talks about Eve and Adam is before. So it's really fascinating. I mean, the whole thing is really beautifully symbolic. That Eve never receives a name until after they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. She's called just the woman until that point, and then he names her, right? He first names her and he says, she will be called Isha, right, which is a derivative of Ish, which is the same word, just add a hey at the end, because that's how he sees her. She's a derivative of him. She's just an object for him to use, and that's why she ends up talking to the snake, because if you're seen as an object by somebody, why would you want to talk with them? You're not an independent human being. And then she sins, they're kicked out, and then he renames her Eve, right? Adam calls her Eve. So he's naming all the animals, right? And then it says, and then God says none of these partners are, and Adam can't find a partner. Right. So you need a helpmate. But the phrase that's used is ezer kenegdo. So it's translated helpmate. Yeah. What it actually means is a helper against you.
Oh.
That's what it actually means in Hebrew. Ezer kenegdo, right?
So there's an adversarial element in there.
Yeah, because what makes you a better person?
The symbolism of the serpent in a tree offering a woman fruit is truly fascinating. But where does it come from? Similarly, in the ancient Mesopotamian story of Inanna and the Hulupu tree, there is also a mention of a garden with a tree that has a snake in it. A young woman who walked in fear of no man and would not be owned plucked the tree from the river and spoke, "I shall bring this tree to a rook. I shall plant this tree in my holy garden." A serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the Hulupu tree. The Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. The young woman who loved to laugh wept. How Inanna wept, yet they would not leave her tree. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is depicted with a serpent in it, almost like a branch, or sometimes even as one with the tree. Is the snake in the tree, or is it that the snake is the tree? It's a bit confusing, and not so unlike Grecian tales of nymphs that turn into trees to escape getting captured by satyrs. But what exactly is the connection? So, what does Eve harvesting the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil have to do with consciousness? Especially considering that fruit, or more particularly apples, are associated with fertility. And now that they've developed even more so, a connotation with evil, how are we supposed to view the eating of the forbidden fruit as a good thing?